Welcome to Flyline Podcast, where we enjoy the interesting stories behind the legendary guides and fishing luminaries connected to Maine fishing. I am your host, Michael Jones. In this episode, we welcome a fishing guide and luminary and very close friend, Carter Davidson. Carter Davidson is an avid fly fisherman and has worked as a producer of outdoor adventure television programs, documentaries, and is the executive producer of Gray Coast Productions. Carter was raised in the western mountains of Maine in the mountain village town of Bethel, located on the banks of the Androscoggin River. Beginning in 2000, Carter got his start with Maine Public Broadcasting, producing and editing a long list of Emmy-nominated magazine series and documentaries. Later, he traveled across the globe to locations such as New Zealand, France, Argentina, Chile, and British Columbia to film all sorts of outdoor adventures from extreme skiing, whitewater rafting, kayaking, skydiving, mountain biking, and of course, fly fishing. In 2007, Carter founded the video production company Gray Coast Productions. Gray Coast Productions served to launch Carter into fly fishing film production to capture the essence of fly fishing through his creative vision. Carter and his multi-talented wife Sarah live in North Conway, New Hampshire, and are the proud parents of two beautiful humans, their son Miles and their daughter Addie. Carter and Sarah enjoy exploring the rivers and mountains of the surrounding area, both as guides and with friends. Carter's other pursuits include upland bird hunting, fly tying, and whitewater rafting with his drift boat and row frame. Carter can often be found hanging out in the West Forks or descending the Kennebec Gorge with his family and friends. In 2022, the Davidson family successfully descended one of the 7 wonders of the world, exploring the Grand Canyon through its entire length. Carter is the regional representative for Liberty Skis in New England and is an exceptional backcountry and inbound skier with vast experience and first-hand knowledge of all of the White Mountains and surrounding backcountry. Carter is widely regarded as the most prolific film producer of Maine fly fishing films and endeavors to capture the magic and unique qualities of the places and people he shares us with. Well, welcome, Carter Davidson. Can you hear us all right?
Hello, Michael Jones. I can hear you perfectly.
When I had the brainchild to do the Flyline podcast, you were definitely on the top 5 of the list, probably more like the top 3 of the list, and possibly you were actually the guy that I wanted to get on first. So,
oh, that's sweet.
Yeah, well, we've done so much of this kind of thing together over the years, and it really helps me to work with someone who I know and care about. And you also have a great story to tell, Carter. It's not. It doesn't go without notice that you're definitely made an imprint on the Maine fly fishing community in a lot of different ways. And I just thought it would be so great to kind of open up a conversation where you can kind of explain a little bit more about who you are, and you're not just a filmmaker. But one thing I thought of, it might be a good starting point for our listeners to just kind of back up from when you first got out of college, before you got to Maine Public Broadcasting. What was going on between those two bookends?
Ooh, taking it way back. That part of my life is a bit of a blur. I went to a couple of colleges in my tenure, if we can call it that. So, graduated from Plymouth State and immediately took the next year off. Moved out to Colorado for a stint, and then wanted to end that 12 months of what I called Carter on a bang, and I think I planned for 6 months in New Zealand and came home maybe around 4 or 5 months because I ran out of money. And in the middle was when I interviewed with Maine Public Broadcasting and received the job while I was in New Zealand at the time. So I needed to get home in order to start employment. Plus, I was already out of money.
What was the job offering that they were? What was the candidate that they were looking for?
Yeah, production assistant was the job title. It's the beginning, in video broadcasting or video production. Production assistant is the beginning. It's the start. So that's where I cut my teeth, as they say.
How did it go? When the job started, and how did the experience begin?
Well, I can tell you this. I wish that I had studied film or video when I was in college. Because once I got there, I realized right away that storytelling was such, to say that it was cool just doesn't give it enough. But I gelled with it. I had a great time doing it, the people that I met along the way.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I remember, actually, I always like to kind of go back to like how we first met. And when we first met, that's what you were doing. And you were working with Lou McNally, and I was at the Mallard Mart in Bethel. I had a drift boat attached to the back of my vehicle. You kind of came rolling in and walked right up to me, and we got talking about drift boats. And I think at the time we both had raging hard-ons for drift boats. We just thought they were the coolest things on earth. I know I felt that way. And you were explaining to me how you were building your drift boat, which we're going to talk a little bit more about later. Sure. But I think within a few days or weeks, if you can correct me on this, you approached me about maybe doing an episode with Lou McNally, and we had Kathy Scott and Dave Van Bergel and a few other people involved, and we went down the section in Solon and told the story about what drift boats were doing in Maine.
Yeah, that was a dream segment for me. So going back to Maine Public Television, started as a production assistant, worked my way up through associate producer, editor, and then eventually became the series producer for their flagship show called Made in Maine, which was, I took that year or two, I think I ran it, as my opportunity to tell all of the cool outdoor stories that I could. Certainly every episode would have a touch of Carter, and that particular one, I think we stocked it full, right, from the drift boat sequence. I can't remember if we caught any fish that day. Do you recall? Did we catch anything on the Kennebec that day?
Yeah, we actually did. Kathy caught a gigantic smallmouth bass on her cane rod. I remember that because
That's right.
We could see a fish working, and naturally we're trying to catch trout. But I also remember it was like any other day where it was a bluebird, sun straight overhead, trout were just not going to play. Right. But it was also a perfect day for shooting. I remember that, and the interviews went well, and we had Bob D on, and it was really fun. And that's really how you and I first met. And then obviously that I think I had made the commitment to marry you at that point, and we we started fishing together, and you showed me the section over in Shelburne. And we shoved my boat over the guardrail, and we did what a lot of people have done that are probably going to listen to this. And it's back in the day when the fishing was great over there. Let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, well, that put-in is a little bit sweeter today than it used to be. You don't have to go over the guardrail anymore.
What is it like? I haven't seen it.
Yeah, so instead of guardrail, just a little bit more river right. They put in a proper driveway. You do need to back up to a couple of big boulders and then drag it. But it's nothing like that chute of gravel. That was just rugged. I think we were belaying it. Technically, we belayed it off of the guardrail back in those earlier days, right?
Yeah, I remember the drill was you would basically take your anchor line and throw it under the guardrail. The drift boat would go over the guardrail, and someone would go down and use their body weight to slow the boat down as you just shoved it down over the boulders and the ledge down into the river. But that's why you had a plastic bottom on your boat, and mine were all fiberglass, and planning on selling them after a year or two anyhow, so it didn't matter. But so there's a timestamp right there. So there we were working, doing some Maine Public Television stuff. You were. I was guiding on the river. And then you probably started to think about like getting into the film industry and like actually doing stuff on your own, and you ultimately left Maine Public Television. Talk about that.
I sure did, yeah. There's a beautiful girl named Sarah who I followed to southern New Hampshire. So left my position at Maine Public and decided that I needed to find another job, and I loved video production so much so that I wanted to stay in that industry. I grew up with a big ski background since a child, so it was sort of no-brainer to look in that field. As a result, I bumped into Dan Egan, who had a television show. I think it was just Wild World of Winter at that time, which was regional. And then after working with him for a year, I said, we ought to consider doing something in the summer. And then all of a sudden turned, a winter show into year round. Got to go to places such as South America to ski, Valle Nevado, Portillo, Chile. Spent 2 or 3 weeks in France in February, all across the Rockies from Big Sky to Squaw. So that was a period of my life, and I was probably in my late 20s at that time. Talk about just, I don't know, an amazing opportunity to film in some of the cooler places of the globe, with skis. And then, like I said, in the summer where we linked up with you, Mike, to start the summer show. I think you were hosting at the time. And I want to say our trip to Argentina was one of the first shows that we cut, wasn't it?
I don't recall. Yeah, I mean, a lot happened at that time. I mean, I remember really just being friends with you when you were with Maine Public, and then going, and hanging out with you when you were working with Dan Egan, and you were busy. You had a lot of stuff. You had deadlines, and you had places to go, and you were doing a ton of production and editing work. And I think you really started to get fluent with using, basically the tools of the trade. Dan's platform offered you the chance to just you had deadlines like this show's got to be out. It's going to be out next week. We need to have this done. I mean, I was around you a couple times when you actually kind of came out of character and you were like, I got to really get on this, And that's not the Carter Davidson that the rest of us know, who's just totally horizontal the rest of the day, But you also got really, really good and crafty, yeah.
That time, I think the commitment was 74 minutes a week that we had to produce, shoot, edit, and then deliver every week.
Yeah, because you're working with a network which demands that you have a product that you hand over to them, and they have sponsors and there's money involved, and it's not like making a film where you can decide that you can release it whenever you want.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And think about that, right? 74 minutes a week to me even blows my mind. I can't believe that we did that, because a feature length film is in the vicinity of 90 minutes, right? And we're doing close to that every week. I mean, it was minimum 12 to 14 hour days, and I can tell you, we would cut a show, put it down, deliver it, and then the next morning, I think I'm in the car at 5 a.m. driving to Sugarbush to meet somebody, to shoot something, turn around, get home, do the same thing. So I think it was probably good for my life at that point because I was able to just get busy. And at the same time, Sarah was in the throes of law school. So we were just sort of both just crazy with work and that part of our life.
Yeah, absolutely. And so was it with Dan Egan that you decided or had the brainchild to make a fishing film?
No, the fishing film was something that was always in my back pocket that I knew that I wanted to do, right? It was going to be just for me. And I think I even picked my company name long before that point. That was something just for me. It wasn't for anybody else. I kind of wanted to go at it on my own.
And you had an idea of what the first film would look like?
Well, I did, in the sense of I sort of wanted to mimic what the ski industry had established with the ski films. Take Matchstick Productions or Warren Miller. And who's the guy from Bridgeton that Maltese Flamingo? His name is escaping me at this moment. He did Maltese Flamingo. He did Blizzard of Oz. Oh, I can't believe I can't remember his name. I'll think of it. But they had. Do you know his name?
This episode is about you, Carter, not him.
Fair enough. So where was I?
Oh, you were just explaining your brainchild of how you wanted to. You were teeing up to the one. You were about to explain how you were thinking about the storyline and how the one was going to lay out.
Right. So I was taking what the ski industry had been doing, and I said, it's a super sweet format. Why can't we do this for fly fishing? And for me, right, fly fishing was as exciting, if not more, than skiing, right? Think of the places, think of the people. And so I knew that my roots were in Maine, and then staying focused in the region of New England. My approach was going to be, let's tell our story here in the Northeast. And if possible, and budget allowed, we'll get out and stretch our legs and do a remote segment if we can make it work. So the one, which I think that title just was perfect for me anyways, because it was the first film, and everybody has their one, right? That was the vibe. When you look back, or when I look back over the past 30 years of fishing, there might be a couple ones. And I can tell you right now, there's a fish in Labrador that was an 8-pound brook trout that ended up being my one today. And so that was the theme. That's where I wanted to go with it, and tell the stories of those who fish New England and what their one is. That was my ultimate goal. That was my vision, anyways.
Yeah, and I'm thinking that you were trying to suggest that the one is like the one memorable experience, or the one thing that opened the door for you, or the one experience you had that really kept you, on a guided path to continue with fishing and fly fishing, especially.
Yeah, it was the beginning, and then that was the other beauty part to it, right? To that title, it was the first film, right? So why not make it number one?
Exactly. So let's go through the list. You that was the very first one, and then there were three others.
We went the one. And then next year, East by Northeast, followed by The Good Life, which I was proud of. That one felt good, right? Like, it took a couple of years to really get my feet underneath me. And that one felt good.
Well, let's talk, what made it feel good, because that's kind of like what this podcast is about, is to explain how, you had an idea. What did you want The Good Life to be, and how did it become what you wanted it to be in the end? How did it become the film that you thought it might become?
I think I was able to I needed a couple of years to figure it out, right? Like, figure out where we needed to go, figure out how it was going to work, figure out how to write the narration and the shots that we needed to make the product that I had hoped to make. We went to some of my favorite places in The Good Life, Labrador being one of them. That segment was supposed to be called The Promised Land, and because it was always on my bucket list, of going to, and not to fish, but to film and, get up in the morning and get on a float plane and go to a place where somebody hadn't been to. And if they had, they certainly hadn't been to that year. So pieces like that just started to all come together. It felt like it was working. There were sponsors too. I mean, it's never been about money. I can honestly say that, right? Like, if you're looking to get into the fly fishing film scene and make money, don't.
Yeah, start with $1 million and get out after a year.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's funny. I was looking at the trailer for The Good Life just recently, and you're the shots that you had with outside of the plane, the floats in the water, just like mirror reflections of people in glass, and it's not just a camera pointed at a guy with a fish. You had definitely stepped it up, and it was clear to me in looking at the trailer on that film that it was, the little dialogue that happens behind the scene instead of just the punchline that you expect from, so many. And, but let's go back just for a second, because I think what's also interesting is you were talking about making a parallel between ski films and fly fishing films. And before the time that you were starting to get into making fly fishing films were mainly instructional. There weren't a lot of destination fly fishing films. Like now, you can get on YouTube and you can watch people like the Jensens, and they're out, they're going to tell you what they're going to do, and it's wonderful, and the drone footage, and there's so many more tools that people have now for shooting that you didn't really have at your fingertips, and you had to grasp at the technology over the years that you were, doing fly fishing films to just not only be on the front edge, but also not lose touch with what other people were doing, right? Were you seeing things that other people were doing that you said, I got to try that? Or did you see something sometimes and say, oh, I know how to do that better? Talk to me a little bit about like working as a producer or camera guy. How did that evolve for you?
I never wanted to be a camera operator. I that was my least favorite piece of production. By default, I had to be in order to make it work, so I learned it. I love the edit. I love putting the story together. I love producing in the sense of who are we going to meet today? What are our logistics in order to make this segment or film work? Who's our voice if we're going to do a narrate? Like putting all of the pieces together to make the end puzzle. I love that part. And so shooting, I just had to do because no one else was going to do it. I don't know if that answers your question, but I definitely remember that part of my early days saying, this is a slog. I mean, making sure you don't run out of batteries and you have plenty of tape, because we were shooting on tape back then, not SD cards.
Yeah, so exactly. I remember when we were in Argentina and you were shooting film then, and we had a bunch of it. You had boxes of basically film tapes, and we had to make sure batteries were all charged, da-da-da-da-da. Now, I mean, and then even before then, back with Maine Public Broadcasting, you'd have a camera guy show up that had like a 75-pound camera on his shoulder, and now where I work, we do high-definition film with a gimbal or with an iPhone that's even better quality. It's just crazy how easy it is now in comparison to what it was when I first met you and watched you in your element.
Yeah, there was one when I first made the switch from tape to digital, and I bought one of those stupid heavy cameras. I still have it, and it's for sale because I don't even want to look at it anymore. It's too heavy. I lugged that thing through better part of Labrador and New Brunswick producing the salmon documentary, and I don't ever want to pick that camera up again. Today's technology is amazing. I want to be right there.
I have a great idea for that camera. You ready?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you should take the camera and put it in the back of the CJ7, and when you park on a hill, just throw it underneath the tire, and then go do what you're going to do and come back, and then just throw it in the back of the CJ. It's going to be perfect for that.
Right, because the e-brake doesn't work, so we can use it as a chalk. Exactly
right. Yeah, that's what the old Nikon people used to say. Like, a Nikon camera is so tough that you can get out and throw it underneath the tire of the car while you go into the film shop to get your film developed, and then come out and then shoot 4 more rolls with the same camera because they're that strong.
Yeah, I like it.
So Carter, to the point you just made, you didn't like doing camera work. What was the thing that you liked? Was it production that you liked doing? I know naturally you're going to say, "Oh, I like working with the people." Everyone says that, but was it after you had stuff recorded? What was it that you liked to do? I'm guessing it's production. Let's just guess it's production.
Yeah, producing, making the film happen, I love. And I also love being in the edit, which is just putting it together, right? Like being able to choose what soundbite and when you take it into the timeline, what soundtrack goes underneath it, the tempo of the segment, the tempo of the entire film. Those decisions and moves I just love, and there's a 1,000 ways to do it. Sometimes it just works out awesome. And when it does, you sort of celebrate that moment. So I like being in the edit.
Yeah, one of your signature moves, I noticed it when I was looking at that trailer for The Good Life, is, I'm going to call it the machine gun, where you do like 10 video clips inside of 10 seconds. Do you know what I'm referring to?
Yep, the rapid fire.
The rapid fire is excellent. It drums up the enthusiasm of the audience. It drums up the excitement of what's about to follow from that. And it's almost like, I think back in the old days, they used to say that in films, advertisers would, like if you were watching a movie in the cinema, they would like give you like one clip for 1 second of like a Coca-Cola can or something, and your mind would pick up on it, but your eyes wouldn't pick up on it. It's like subliminal. Have you ever heard of this?
I think so.
Yeah, it was subliminal advertising is what they called it. But it's almost like you're scratching at the door of that by doing the machine gun, 10 shots in 10 seconds. It's like, it makes your heart rate go up a little bit. It makes it exciting. So, so we're getting probably pretty good to a pretty good spot to just take a break for a minute and come back after a little bit. I want to talk about your guiding more than your filmmaking, if you don't mind. What do you think of that idea, Carter?
Yeah, I don't mind at all. I'd like to thank my sponsors, Jimmy Dean's Sausage and Marlboro Light.
Absolutely. We'll be right back. For this Flyline flashback, I want to share that I grew up in Mount Vernon, Maine, and learned to fly fish in the Belgrade Lakes region. In Don Wilson's book, Glimpses of Maine's Angling Past, Don shared this wonderful piece of Maine fly tying history. Messalonsky Lake was the favorite water of Dr. J. Herbert Sanborn, who carried out many experiments here with the aid of his good friend Emile Letranel, brother of the famed newspaper outdoor columnist Jean Letranel. Emile Letranel developed the tandem streamer to eliminate short strikes. Sanborn developed a green, black, and white fly, which within the first few minutes of its first trial caught a 4-pound brook trout landed by Jean Letranel. Not long afterwards, Sanborn was using the fly and hooked a salmon that gave him a long battle. It tipped the scales at 9 pounds 3 ounces, and the fly was appropriately named the 9-3. Messalonsky Lake also holds the state record for white perch, a 4-pound 10-ounce fish taken in 1949 by Miss Earl Small of Waterville. And now let's return to the second part of our show. So, Carter, we talked about the front end of your film series that you had done, the first couple, and let's go back a little bit and talk about the end of the last few films that you did and what your goals were. And I know that you started to really garner attention in the industry, and people were interested in getting you involved. Speak to me a little bit more about how that became successful for you.
Right, like I was saying, The Good Life, I felt like I started to kind of get my groove a little bit, and I wasn't giving up just yet. I got into doing the Atlantic salmon documentary, Turning Tail, which was a full feature, full documentary on Atlantic salmon here in the Northeast, specifically from, I think, Connecticut River all the way up to Greenland. One of my goals all along was to be accepted into any film festival, and in this case, the marquee for me was the fly fishing scene. So making Turning Tail, a short version, into the fly fishing film tour was sort of the marquee for me. Like that was an achievement that I was proud of. That group coincidentally came from the ski world and the paddling world, and graduated into the fly fishing scene. For example, you heard me mention Warren Miller earlier on. The two owners of the fly fishing film tour at the time came from Warren Miller Entertainment. So just to give you a sense of the product that they were putting out. So making it into that tour was just huge for me. And then the short film after Turning Tail, which was North Wild, shot fully in Labrador. We were going for landlocked salmon and found a lot of big brook trout, but one landlocked salmon. So while we were in production shooting, it started to become obvious that this might not be a landlocked salmon film, that we're going to be going off the grid for brook trout. So the ability to pivot and find some remarkable square tails along the way was part of that north of wild experience. The George River, 5 days I think we were fully off the grid, and that short film again was accepted into the film tour, and it just meant a lot. It felt good to be on a national level with a Grey Ghost production film, you know.
I do, yeah. And you had a kind of an old guy with a beard that was was he in that one? I think he was, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Who was that guy?
Yeah, John Gierach. Yeah, he was.
Never heard of him. Who was he? No.
Yeah, he's written a couple of books along the way.
Oh, yeah. Well, just for the audience, John Gierach is probably the most celebrated fly fishing author that is living today. So, Carter, how'd you meet him? How did that all go? I never asked you that, and I think the audience would be interested to know, like, how did you meet John Gierach?
It was in Labrador. Technically, I first met him on the floatplane dock in Wabush. I had driven 26 hours straight and fell asleep in the parking lot at the floatplane dock in Wabush. And at 6:15 in the morning, a guy knocked on my window while I was sleeping. And I rolled the window down. I said, "Hello?" And he said, "Are you Carter Davidson?" I said, "I am." He said, "Are you going to Crossroad Lake?" And I think I said, "Where's that?"
I love
it. And he said, Three Rivers Lodge. I said, "Yeah, I'm going there." He goes, "Well, floatplane's leaving in 15. So, okay, I'll get right out. Roll up the window, and the guy traveling with me, I looked at him. I said, I think that was John fucking Gierach."
That's right.
Yeah, and it sure was. So, yeah, he was in Turning Tail and also North of Wild. And just a pleasure to hang with, to spend time with. He's a remarkable man.
Yeah, you hear nothing but the greatest things said about him. He sounds like he's just a fantastic person. What a gift that you could get him in front of the camera, and the footage that you have of him is fantastic. And hopefully the audience will take the opportunity to see these films and see John being filmed by Carter, because that was pretty special at the time. And I think it still will stand as a wonderful testament to him. He's actually a guy that doesn't just write; he actually fishes, and he truly has a passion for it. Very cool. Is there another film left in you? Do you think you're going to do another one at some point, or you putting down the camera? Or
no, there's still a camera, and the battery's probably pretty charged, at least well enough, and I could go wheels up tomorrow if I wanted to. I'm working on something, just on paper at the moment. I've always wanted to do something that crosses both the ski and the fly fishing scene. So there's a little hint. In the past, I don't know, handful of years, I've spent up more time on whitewater, so there might be a way to add that into it. And then also I've got two youngish children, I think, at this point. Addie, who's 10, and Miles, who's 12 or 11. Addie's 11, and 12 is Miles. So I feel like they're a part of it. There's something with the family that makes me happy today. So that might be another hint for you too.
I love it. Yeah. So you haven't heard the intro, but I do talk about the Grand Canyon when I describe to the listeners who you are and some of the accomplishments that you've made. Did you guys bring a rod on the Grand Canyon?
We did. Yeah. Found some nice rainbow.
Yeah, I did the canyon back in '89, and I did fish. I think they told me that there was going to be sections where we'd be floating, and there wasn't going to be a lot of whitewater on a couple of days, and we actually ate rainbow trout at night. I don't really, advocate for killing fish, but it's nice to have a fresh fish on a trip like that.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, and we had green water the entire way, so that was pretty special.
So, Carter, we share a mutual affection for drift boats. Let's talk about Eddie. We kind of started off the segment about how you were building Eddie when you and I first met. Tell the audience who Eddie is and what Eddie became?
Eddie is, well, I mean, I think the template was a 16 foot, but she measures, I want to say 15 and a half by gunnel, wooden drift boat. I bought the blueprints from Tapman Boats out of Oregon, and I built her pretty close to 20 years ago without owning a single tool.
You have a buddy that has a commercial Adirondack chair business. Didn't you build the boat in his facility?
Yep. I have friends in low places, Michael.
I know. I met the guy. He's great. He's the one that gave us a ride to Logan so we could go to
That's right.
Argentina. Isn't that the same cat?
Yeah, Scotty Mazie, Scotty Too Hottie. So I went into the build not knowing anything.
Right.
And came out of it knowing a little bit more than little. Yeah, she's a sweetheart. Predominantly been on the Androscoggin, a little bit on the Kennebec, Penobscot rivers. There's some really nice water here in Maine, but not all of it's drift boat water. She's been up on the Rapid when we were guiding up there too. So, yeah, 16 feet. I named her Eddie because of the character from the book The River Why.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. By David James Duncan, which that book played had a huge impact, I think, on me in my late 20s, mid-20s, late 20s. So that just sort of seemed fitting. I've discussed purchasing a fiberglass boat for work and just haven't been able to do it yet. And there's clients who really get upset when I put a motor on the back of an old wooden boat, such as Eddie, thinking that it's not true. Like somebody shouldn't do that to a wooden boat, but she still gets around just fine.
Yeah. Well, I love fishing out of that boat. It's beautiful. There's something elegant about a wooden drift boat. Is Bill Pierce says it looks like a Stradivarius floating down the river. So that's what your boat looks like too, as well. It was fun to you and I kind of hooked up this last summer when I was playing with my drone and I was just flying around. You with your friends, you're just kind of having an off day with guide buddies, and it's beautiful. It's just it's wonderful to see a wooden drift boat on the water, and especially in Maine, it just really fits right in with the background. But the other thing, there's a lot of things I've never really asked you, and here's another one. You are both a registered Maine guide and a registered New Hampshire guide.
Correct. Yeah.
And I know I can remember what the testing procedure was like to become a Maine guide. It was like, if it was a test, I would have passed it immediately, but it was more like, it was really, really crazy, like questions coming out of anywhere, and you could tell the wardens that were on the board were tough. What was your testing experience like both in New Hampshire and in Maine? Do you remember what those tests were like and who administered them?
Oh, yeah. I don't think I'll ever forget those tests.
Let's hear about it.
New Hampshire, I tested first, and at the time, it was a written only, roughly 100 questions, some multiple choice, some true false, but simple, right? You needed to study and you needed to have the correct answers, but there was no oral component. So super easy. Today's standards for New Hampshire are closer to Maine. In fact, it was modeled off of Maine with a written and then a full map compass, lost person, but I think it's called something different, and that whole oral component. So I snuck into New Hampshire before they made that change. Guided for, I think, a couple of summers, very much part-time, and then I think it was my wife who said, you ought to just go get Maine. That's where you want to be anyways. So that test, talk about nerves. I remember sitting in my truck in Augusta, waiting to walk in and just petrified of what I was walking into. Map and compass, lost person scenario. I got through map and compass pretty smooth. They send you outside to wait while they talk about you, and I figured that was that, right? They were going to send me packing. And then they brought me back in, said, okay, good to go. I don't remember any of the specific questions with the oral, but I just remember being fully intimidated by the entire scene and grateful to pass at the end of the day, right? Like, talk about achievements, the Maine guide being the marquee for guides in the testing land.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, when I was working in the rafting industry back in the 80s and 90s, I got invited to sit on the board and actually do testing in Greenville. And then later I got invited as a fishing guide and master guide to sit on a testing board in Augusta for the general rec in fishing and hunting. And I remembered I decided going into it, I was going to say to the people that were the candidates to get their license, like, our goal is to have you pass this test. We want you to get through this process successfully. And I only did that because I wish someone had said that to me, to just to kind of calm the nerves. And I think it helped too. And, I actually ended up testing someone that I knew, and I didn't give them any, advantage or anything like that. I actually kind of sat back and just listened for the most part. But the testing procedure in Maine. Maine is recognized as having the most difficult guiding test for of any country. I mean, of any state in the country. I apologize. And that's because the expectation for hiring a Maine guide should be that they're the best, and that's why we celebrate that. And to that point, Carter, once I book the trip with a client and I know that they're going to be coming on the 15th of June or whenever it is, the days before, the night before, I think about, like, what do I got to do? Like, what's your pre-trip process like in planning and like loading the cooler, and like how do you communicate with your clients? Like, let's just speak to the people that are getting into guiding. Like, how do the real guys do it? Like, how do you do it?
So first call is mostly trying to get a read on where we're going, who they are, what their goals are. Eventually we'll get into the we'll choose the location. Although I was just thinking about that the other day. Like, I feel like one of my faults is that I have too many options that could be in play, and I should just stay focused on the right one, where that I feel is the place that we should be going. That's it. That's what we're doing. I think far too often I give them too many options, and then nobody knows how to decide. And it's like me and the kids trying to figure out what we're going to have for dinner. And you have too many options, you're just not going to eat. So
absolutely. I found that as I started to get more experienced, I would drive the conversation,
right?
Not like in a way like I'm the guy that's in charge of this trip, or you need to listen to me, or any of that. It was more like I felt like if I was just really clear and like, this is where we're going to go, this is what we're going to do, this is when we're going to meet, and then I'd always ask them, like, what do you want to have happen on that day?
Right.
And then just shut my mouth and let them talk.
Right.
And I think I found that people will tell you what their expectation is if you give them a chance to do it. And very often I learn, I thought this guy wanted to go catch big fish. He actually just wants to learn how to cast better, or he wants to learn more about knots, or, did you get that as well?
Yeah, or learn how to row a drift boat. There's a little bit of that too. So learn how to nymph. But you're right. I think driving the conversation in the sense of, here's what I'm confident in for, like, let's say we're gonna go for the Androscoggin. Here's what I'm confident in at this time of year. So this is where we're gonna go, and I'll be able to show you a good time in doing it. So I think that sort of talks to that pre-trip piece. The rest just sort of sorts itself out in terms of when we're going to meet and what we're going to have for lunch. Do I need to do a hot shore lunch? And if so, what are we going to have? There's some really killer Maine guides out there that put on a beautiful lunch. And in all transparency, I've been on trips with guides who, like in Oregon, for example, fishing the Deschutes, talk about a lunch, bottles of wine and yummy sourdough bread, and all of the fixings. So if a client wants that, then that's what we're going to do.
Tuki did a really good job with that in Argentina, didn't he?
He sure did. Yeah. And that's a great example. And then there's some customers that, they want a rolled up sub. They don't even want to sit down. They want to have a fly rod in one hand and the sub in the other and just fish for 10 hours. I try to listen to what their expectations are and then deliver.
Yeah, and I even steer the lunch, like what the lunch will be based on the itinerary. Like we're going to be floating 12 miles. Well, we're not going to have 2 hours for lunch, and right. That kind of thing. But just as for the listeners at home, the Megantic Club is an exclusive fishing club up north of Eustis, and Megantic is actually a Native American word which means you're going to have a 2.5 hour lunch.
Mandatory,
exactly. So that's kind of like every guide is a little bit different. I think you and I are more like day runners, you might say. Like, I'm not spending days on end with a client. I'm going to be with them for one day. So I want to hit the ball out of the park. I've been doing street tacos lately. That's been working out really well. Just they're quick. Everyone loves them. You don't feel like you ate too much at lunchtime so that you're ready to take a nap after. And I think the whole thing is about easy. I want the lunch for me as the guide to be easy. It's like heat it up quick. Everyone's eating within a few minutes. Boom, bang, back in the boat. Here we go. What's your favorite lunch to do?
So on a cold fall day that's probably wet, either mom's chicken noodle soup or a beef stew if I have time. And that could be hot in a thermos, and then we just make it work, or bring a burner and heat it up. There's something that brings you back to life when you get something warm in you on a cold day.
Yeah, when Sherry and I fish in the fall, we have a little single burner, and we always bring a soup. And she makes a great beef stew, which is perfect. It really sticks to your bones, as you say. So,
and don't forget those times when we were guiding up on the rapid. Those were 18-hour days. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, and all of the fishing in between. Like, talk about long days.
Yeah, and guiding now on the rapid, of course I don't do much of it anymore, but I do guide on the rapid, but I really guide one guy. And we've figured out that the science there is that you fish hard in the morning until around 10, and then you take your waders off and you take a nap and relax and you have a light lunch, and then you pick back up at 4. And by then, the guys on the mountain bikes they've all left because the sun was straight overhead and they're all worn out. They didn't bring enough water, and the river clears out and we fish, till dark. And but yeah, every trip's different.
Yeah, certainly is.
Yeah, let's talk about the rapid. What's your first memory going into the rapid?
My first memory of the rapid. So I painted houses in Bethel, Maine in the summers when I was in college for 2 or 3 years. And the boss, his name was Vernon Davis. And I said, and we called him Haas. And I said, Haas, I'm tired of fishing the Andro. Where do I need to go to catch a brook trout? He gave some line of, you got to go to the Rapid River. So I found it on the Gazetteer and then got completely lost trying to find my way in there. Like, so far lost that I probably shouldn't have even found it. But I did. And I think by the time I got in there, it was 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I had started in the morning. I walked down into Lower Dam, started walking down River Left, ended up crossing that small channel over onto the island just below Wing Dam in that beautiful old-growth forest.
Oh, yeah, it's gorgeous.
Big old hemlocks in there. And a young spring fawn jumped out from behind one of those big hemlocks and scared the living heck out of me to the point where I think I fell over backwards.
I did not know that. Now, it's funny you say that. I bet that there's a doe, she's probably 15 years old, that puts a fawn on that island every year, because I have the story you just told, I can tell the same story. I had the exact same thing happen, waded across to the island by the big rock, the big boulder below Wing Dam, walked down into the island, and it's rough down through there. There's trees down, there's rocks everywhere, there's boulders, and this little spotted Bambi jumps up and ran like a Kawasaki Ninja 750R through the woods and like bleeding, blah, 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 running away. And I was like, oh crap, shit, I didn't mean to. Oh, where's your mom? You know. And I think what they do is they plant their fawns there because they know that the coyotes won't go out on the island.
Sure. Yeah. It's safe.
Isn't that fun? Yeah, it's funny. We both had that experience, and
Yeah.
you know, they say don't ever touch or get near. You see a fawn like that, it's fine. Leave it alone. The mom's not far away. She's just taking a break and getting some food. So that's the takeaway from that experience. But yeah, Carter. Well, I mean, what else could we talk? We could talk forever. We really could. Don't you agree?
I do. Yep. We haven't talked about Patagonia, which
Let's do it. Let's do it.
one of the most iconic adventures on a fishing scene, at least for me. That was what a killer trip.
Yeah. So let me set the backdrop for the audience. So Carter's working for Danny again. The ski industry down in Argentina is trying to promote alternative activities other than just skiing, and so they're trying to promote fly fishing. And the Neuquén region, which is really kind of the wine country just below Mendoza, is the place. It's kind of like, what would be the equivalent, Carter? Jackson Hole. What would the audience recognize as a place in the United States that would be equivalent to San Martin de los Andes?
Yeah, I'd say Jackson Hole with the Snake River there, although I haven't been to Sun Valley. It would be along those lines too. Anything Idaho or Montana based, I think would be a good fit.
You're in a town where you've got 5 to 7 major watersheds flowing through drainage basins, and every one of them is full of 5 to 10 pound fish. And I remember that was our challenge. It was so funny when we first showed up there. We were filming, so you had sticks and cameras rolling, and we were going out and trying to catch fish on camera. We were going to promote the off-season, fly fishing for the ski community, and we got hooked up with the number one guide, Carlos Viscaro. And this guy had the drift boat. He had the lodges. I mean, we went to. They rolled it all out, man. Don't you agree?
Yep. Beautiful wine, amazing cuts of steak and beef, huge brown trout. One of my most favorite shots of all time was you standing on a boulder that is surrounded by water, casting over a barbed wire fence. This is how high the river was when we were there. And hooked up into, 4 or 5 pound brown trout. That was just gorgeous. And all of that, I have the sequence, to prove the point of, you legitimately caught a fish while casting over a barbed wire fence, and then had to climb the barbed wire fence in your waders to land the fish. It was just one of my most favorite shots of all time.
Growing up on a farm in Mount Vernon, Maine, with barbed wire fences taught me the skills to jump over it. And I think really what's also being said is we were there in November, which is, because you're in the other hemisphere, that's actually their springtime. That's our fall, but that's their spring. So the glaciers were melting, the water was high, and the fish were chasing black woolly buggers. I think that seemed to be the fly that we just tied on, and we would put on 0x tippet, whatever pound 0x is, 14 pound.
16, I think it was 16 pound.
And you could do no wrong, and there were fish behind everything that you thought there should be a fish behind. And we fished the Majeo, we fished the Shimiwin a lot, and the Kujinkura, and a couple of other rivers that I can't recall the name now, or I can't even pronounce them. Lumine, yep. And that was a great trip. It was fantastic. And of course, the reason that we were there for so long is we were only supposed to be there for a fixed amount of time, but you recall there was an airline strike.
Yeah, we couldn't, the flights coming out on international were open, but we just couldn't get to an airport large enough to get to that flight. So we were stuck, and I remember panicking.
Yeah.
Having been on the road for 10, 14 days, something like that, panicking of, am I going to be stuck in Argentina for the rest of my life?
Yeah, we had a conversation. I actually had to grab you by the sleeve. So okay, trips end. We're supposed to leave. Tukey takes us down to Bariloche. Is it Bariloche? Is that where we went?
Bariloche, yeah.
Yeah, and we're down there, and we walk into the local airline office. It's not the airport; it's just the office where you go to check in. And the nice Argentine woman there is explaining very kindly that the flights aren't going out. We don't know, and the whole thing. And you start losing your shit.
Totally.
And Tukey's like, I mean, this guy's a pro. He's like, well, we can go back to the lodge and fish for today and tomorrow, and come back on Thursday, and you start going like old school on him. You were pissed, and I like grabbed you by the collar and hauled you out on. I remember it like it was yesterday. I hauled you out on the sidewalk, and I said, I know you have something to produce for Dan Egan. It ain't gonna happen. Let's go fishing.
Yep.
And we did, and I was delighted. I had at that point in my life, I was like, pinch me, I'm in heaven. I don't need to leave this place anytime soon. Nothing takes priority over what this experience is producing for us, and we continue to. Right.
I know. It's crazy to me that I didn't just settle right into that saying, great, let's stay another week. Because I'll tell you right now, Mike, if given that opportunity again, I would applaud an airline strike to be stuck there for 24 hours to another 24 days. You can't get that back.
No, and we really enjoyed it. And I remember the craziness is that we actually ended up getting, we both got a domestic flight to Santiago, Chile, which was not part of our original itinerary. And I ended up, there was like one seat left. I was on whatever they call it in the airline industry, standby. And all of a sudden they said, we have one seat, and you and I and Dan was actually there because he was sailing. And we all looked at each other, and Dan looked at me and he said, Mike, get on that plane. And I flew back into JFK, not knowing when you guys were going to come behind me. And the other part of it is all my other flights I'd missed, so I didn't know that I had an airline ticket anymore to get back to Maine. And as I flew in that morning to JFK, you arrived at ass crack early in the morning, 5 o'clock, whatever. I'm in the line to go through customs, and I've got my bags and everything, and the customs people are all standing around. And this guy leans up to me, and he whispers in my ear, standing right there is Lars Ulrich from Metallica. Did I ever tell you this?
You did, yeah.
Yeah, so I look, and of course, you know me, I'm a guitarist, I'm a metal guy, I love that stuff. And I look, and there's Lars Ulrich, had just cut his hair short, he's wearing a baseball hat, he's got a black backpack, he's got a black leather jacket on, he's standing dead in front of me. So I go through customs, and you got your shoes off, you got your belt off, you got your laptop, whatever we had at the time, and I'm standing next to him, and I look at him and I said, I hate to do this, man, and I really am sorry, but I'd love to have your autograph. And he looks me straight in the eye, big smile, slaps me on the shoulder with his open hand, and he says, no problem. And I still to this day have an incredible Lars Ulrich. He wrote Talica on it. Lars Ulrich, Talica, apostrophe Talica. So that kind of made me start to feel good about getting back to the United States. But man, I'll never forget the trip to Argentina. That was just killer. And that's what we put into the one. So if you want to watch one of Carter's films, I would start with that one.
So question for you. What was your favorite location or moment or shot even from that trip? Do you recall?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think the thing that was going on for me is you and I had already started doing some filming together, and you were always trying to get whoever the person was that we were working with to have some enthusiasm, like put a smile on your face, act excited, do whatever. Well, this guy Tukey, we're catching, 18, 19, 20-inch brown trout, and I finally had to say to him, look, Tuk, when we catch one of these fish, you got to act like this is real. And okay, all right. So we were kind of going down, I think it was the middle section of the Shimiwen, and he says, I want to roll the boat up into this spring creek. There's usually a big fish in this spring creek. So we rowed the boat up, and it's just kind of like pond water with, kind of a tributary flowing into it. He says, throw that cast all the way across and see if something takes it. And we caught a monster. And of course, it's in the film. It's a gigantic brown. And he becomes animated for the first time. Do you remember this?
I sure do.
Yeah, that's probably the one shot that turned it around and he said, now that's an Argentine brown trout. And he everything else was just a little skipper to him. To you and I, they were beautiful. I mean, 20-inch brown trout's a gorgeous fish, but to him, he wanted to see a 26-inch fish put in the net, and that's we were finally able to accomplish that. And the other thing that I really like too is that section of the Maggio at Red Gate. That was probably one of the most beautiful places I've ever been on Earth, and the Native American, South American artifacts, and we remember seeing the red stag.
Gorgeous.
I mean, that's private water. That's at San Alberto Lodge, Maggio River. If you had one place to go in Argentina, that probably wouldn't be a bad place to go, especially if you like to walk around in waders.
I agree.
Carter, it's been just such a pleasure to talk to you about this. It brings back a ton of memories. It means so much that you're willing to help with the project, and hopefully the audience will be able to get a little takeaway of what it's like to listen to a guy that actually spent his career getting into the fly fishing film industry, and I think that you're just a fantastic person. You're one of my favorite humans, and you've brought so much pleasure to my life, and you're always welcome in my boat as long as you're rowing. No, I'm just kidding. We like to, for those that don't know us, we always shift off. I'll catch a fish, Carter will catch a fish, and we just row. And that's the way it rolls with us, right?
That's right. You got to play baseball, 3 strikes or a hit, and then you switch it out.
Carter, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate your contributing to the podcast, and I think that's a wrap.
All right. You're doing good things, Michael. Thanks for having me on.
I love to hear you say that. I love the positive enthusiasm. That brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you for joining us for this intimate discussion, and thank you for listening to Flyline Podcast. A new Flyline Podcast episode will be released every 2 weeks on Tuesdays, so be sure to come back to meet our next famous guest. Until then, this is Michael Jones. Flyline Podcast is a product of Riverside FM.